In this lesson, we're going to talk about deconstruction. And deconstruction is essentially the solve process. So deconstruction is utilizing your deconstruct story and showing that in an algebraic process. So this deconstruction, or the solve process, is just the algebraic manipulation of the numbers so that we can find out whatever the variable was worth. So if you remember from our webs, we started with something that had like w equals 16. And then you added, let's say we added 5, so then we ended up with w plus 5 equals 21. And then from there, let's say we multiplied by 2, and so now we have 2 times the quantity w plus 5, or 2 times the sum, equals 42. So now if we wanted to, so the construction of this is w is added by 5, and that sum is multiplied by 2, the result is 42. When we deconstruct, we're just going in the opposite direction, and so we would say that first you're going to divide by 2, and then you're going to subtract 5. So that's construction and deconstruction. So construction is going to the right, deconstruction is going to the left. The solve process is allowing us the manipulation of the numbers to actually find out whatever the truth value, the value of the variable was to begin with. So in this case, you've seen this equation before. So we're going to start with a is divided by 2, the quotient is subtracted by 5, the difference is multiplied by -3, and that whole expression, the result is equal to 9. So in reverse order, we're going to take, instead of multiplying by -3, we're going to divide by -3. Instead of subtracting 5, we're going to add 5. Instead of dividing by 2, we're going to multiply by 2. So now we want to show this in an algebraic approach. So we start with 9, so that means our expression is equal to 9. So we're starting with our actual equation, our problem. And then this tells us we're going to divide by -3. And so when I divide by -3, I know that I'm going to end up with a difference. And that difference is this piece right here. So I know when I divide by -3, I am left with the difference, which is this. And this difference must be equal to -3, because when I multiplied by -3, I ended up with 9. Okay, so it's the opposite. We're just going backwards on our construction, or our webs that we had done from the beginning. So next, if we were to add 5, we know that when we add 5, that's the opposite of subtracting by 5, we're going to end up with a quotient, and the quotient lives right here. So we know that a divided by 2, when I add 5, that must mean this value, this quotient, was equal to 2 to begin with. And again, if I multiply by -3, or I'm sorry, if I add 5, I ended up from here to here. And then if I divide by -3, that's what happened from here to here. So going the other way, if I subtract 5, that is now -3. Multiplied by -3, that value is 9. Now we know also that when you multiply by 2, that's the opposite of dividing by 2, so that means I'm left with a. And so, and a sits right here, and so I know that a is going to be, I multiply by 2, was worth originally 4. So now I want to check my answer. So as you guys see, we start with the construction story. That leads us to the deconstruct story. Our deconstruct story is our solve process. This deconstruct story is showing your work. Notice how everything I did here is the process to which it allows me to move through my web. Rather than going to the right on my web, if you will, which would have been starting with the variable and moving up, now I'm starting with the equation and moving back to what's the variable's worth. And so the last thing I need to do is actually check my solution. So when I check my solution, I'm going to plug the value of 4 where I see the a. So I have -3 times the quantity of 4 divided by 2 minus 5, and that equals 9. At least we're going to check to see if it equals 9. Well, the first thing I need to do is take a, which is 4, and I divide that by 2, exactly what my construction story is telling me to do, which that means it's negative 3 is 2 minus 5. Then the quotient, which was this, is subtracted by 5, so the quotient gave me a value of 2. I'm going to subtract it by 5, so I get negative 3 is negative 3. And I'm still checking to see if this is 9. And sure enough, 9 equals 9, and that is a check. I also want to point out here that this value of 2 sits right here. This value of negative 3 sits right here, and the value of 9 sits right here. We're starting with 4, started our whole checking process. Now we're going to talk about the recipes one more time from a couple lessons ago. And if you recall, we had this equation that we ended up with where we doubled the amount of vanilla because we were going to make a second batch of cookies. And then at the very last moment, we added in 1/4 teaspoon more of vanilla. So that's essentially our construction story. So our deconstruct story would be, oh, so we added in 1/4 teaspoon. I'm going to get rid of that 1/4 teaspoon. Instead of doubling, I'm going to take half of the amount that I actually had. So in this case, we just want to do the solve process, and then we want to check to make sure we did it correctly. So the construction story is written within the problem. We orally said the deconstruct story, so now we're going to start with 7. So that means we're going to start with our equation. And then instead of adding 1/4 teaspoon, we're going to get rid of that 1/4 teaspoon. And when we get rid of that 1/4 teaspoon, we now know we have 6 3/4 teaspoons left over. And then we had to double our recipe, but we want to know what we originally had. So we are going to multiply this by 1/2 or just divide by 2. And so V equals, if you take out your calculators and you just take 6.75 and divide it by 2, you should end up with, so I wanted to quickly just show you, so 6.75 divided by 2 is going to equal the 3.375, and that's 3.375 teaspoons of vanilla. So now we want to check our answer, and so when I check my answer, I'm going to, I know that I started out with 3.375 teaspoons of vanilla, or at least I think I do, because that's what I'm checking. And according to our information, we're going to double that. And so 2 times 3.375. And then in our last step, we're going to add in 1/4. And we want to check to see if, in fact, this ends up with 7 teaspoons. And so when I take 2 times 3.375, I end up with 6.75. And I'm going to add 1/4, and I end up with 7 equals 7. So I know my work was correct.